The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as King Charles walked through the corridors that had housed his family for generations. 6 months had passed since his mother's funeral, yet the weight of her absence still pressed heavily on his shoulders. The castle felt different now, quieter somehow, as if the very walls mourned the loss of their longest-serving monarch. Charles paused outside his mother's private study, a room that remained exactly as she had left it. Her reading glasses still lay folded on the mahogany desk next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. Fresh flowers, replaced weekly by devoted staff, filled the crystal vase she had cherished. Everything waited, frozen in time, as if Queen Elizabeth might return at any moment to resume her daily routine. The new king had been reluctant to disturb anything in these sacred spaces. His mother's personal belongings told the story of a remarkable life dedicated to service. Each item held memories that stretched back decades, connecting him to his childhood and the woman who had shaped not just his destiny, but the destiny of a nation. Camilla, now queen consort, had been patient at first. She understood Charles needed time to grieve, to process the enormity of his new role. But as weeks turned to months, her patience began to wear thin. She had her own family to consider, her own legacy to protect. Her children from her first marriage, Tom and Laura, had always lived somewhat in the shadows of royal life. Now, with her elevated position, she saw opportunities that might never come again. The tension began subtly, with seemingly innocent suggestions. During their private dinners, Camilla would mention how certain pieces might look lovely in Tom's new home, or how Laura had always admired a particular painting. Charles, distracted by affairs of state and still deep in mourning, barely registered these comments. He trusted his wife implicitly, believing her interest stemmed from genuine appreciation for his mother's taste, rather than any ulterior motive. One evening, as autumn rain pelted the windows of their private sitting room, Camilla broached the subject more directly. She spoke of the importance of sharing the Queen's legacy with those who would truly appreciate it. Her voice carried a note of urgency that Charles had not heard before, though he attributed it to her natural enthusiasm for family. The Queen's jewelry collection alone was worth millions, but its true value lay in the history each piece represented. The sapphire brooch worn on Coronation Day, the pearl necklace gifted by her father, the diamond tiara that had graced state dinners for decades. These weren't merely expensive ornaments, but symbols of continuity, connecting past monarchs to future generations. Camilla's interest wasn't limited to jewelry. The Queen's art collection included priceless paintings, rare manuscripts, and historical artifacts that had been carefully preserved for centuries. Among these treasures were personal items that held deep sentimental value for Charles. His mother's private correspondence, family photographs spanning decades, and small mementos that captured intimate moments of royal family life. The household staff began to notice subtle changes. Camilla made more frequent visits to the Queen's private rooms, often accompanied by her personal assistant. She asked detailed questions about various items, their history, and their current storage arrangements. The loyal servants who had served the Queen for decades felt uncomfortable but said nothing out of respect for their new Queen consort. Charles remained largely unaware of these activities. The demands of kingship consumed his days, from audiences with government ministers to state visits and constitutional duties. When he returned to their private quarters each evening, he found comfort in Camilla's presence, grateful for her support during this challenging transition period. The first real warning sign came from an unexpected source. Princess Anne, Charles's sister, had always been protective of their mother's memory. During a family gathering at Sandringham, she mentioned feeling uneasy about certain changes she had noticed in the Queen's former rooms. Some items seemed to have been moved or were missing entirely. When she questioned the staff, they nervously deflected her inquiries. Anne's concerns reached Charles through his private secretary, who approached the subject with characteristic diplomatic caution. The king initially dismissed these worries as his sister's natural protectiveness, but a seed of doubt had been planted. He began to pay closer attention to Camilla's behavior, noting her increased interest in his mother's possessions and her frequent discussions about preserving the legacy for future generations. The breaking point approached when Camilla suggested hosting a private viewing for her family, allowing Tom and Laura to appreciate the Queen's collection firsthand. She presented this as an educational opportunity, a chance for her children to understand the historical significance of the monarchy. Charles, still grieving and trusting his wife's intentions, agreed to the arrangement. What Charles didn't know was that Camilla had been making detailed inventories of the Queen's possessions, photographing items and researching their values. She had convinced herself that as Queen Consort, she had every right to ensure these treasures were distributed fairly among family members. In her mind, the royal family now included her children, and they deserved to benefit from their step-grandfather's inheritance. The private viewing was scheduled for a quiet weekend when Charles would be attending to royal duties in Scotland. Camilla planned to use this opportunity not just to show her family the collection, but to begin the process of claiming certain pieces for her own purposes. She had prepared careful justifications for each item she intended to take, ready to present them to Charles as thoughtful preservation efforts rather than personal appropriation. As the weekend approached, tensions within the royal household began to surface. Long-serving staff members, who had witnessed decades of royal family dynamics, sensed something troubling in the air. Their loyalty to the late Queen's memory conflicted with their duty to serve the new monarchs. Some began to document the movement of items, creating an informal record of what they observed. Charles, meanwhile, found himself increasingly troubled by half-remembered conversations and subtle changes in his familiar surroundings. The weight of his mother's legacy pressed upon him not just as king, but as her son. He began to realize that protecting her memory and honoring her lifetime of service might require more vigilance than he had initially understood. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the royal household, testing loyalties and forcing difficult decisions about family, duty, and the sacred trust of preserving centuries of royal heritage. The weekend of the private viewing arrived with an unusual chill in the air, as if nature itself sensed the coming storm. Charles had departed for Edinburgh early Friday morning, leaving behind specific instructions that the Queen's private rooms were to remain undisturbed during his absence. He trusted that his household staff would maintain their usual vigilance and respect for his mother's memory. Camilla wasted no time once her husband's plane disappeared into the Scottish sky. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, coordinating with her personal staff and making arrangements that she believed would go unnoticed. Tom and Laura arrived Saturday morning, accompanied by a small team of what Camilla described as heritage consultants, but were actually appraisers and logistics specialists. The Queen's private study became the focal point of activity. Camilla led her family through room after room, pointing out pieces that had caught her attention during previous visits. Her voice carried a proprietary tone that made several long-serving staff members deeply uncomfortable. She spoke of the items as if they were already hers to distribute, discussing which pieces would look best in Tom's London townhouse or Laura's country estate. The most shocking moment came when Camilla approached the Queen's jewelry vault. Using access codes she had obtained through her position as Queen Consort, she opened cases that hadn't been disturbed since the funeral. The late Queen's most precious personal items lay before them: her wedding ring from Prince Philip, the bracelet Charles had given her for her last birthday, and countless other pieces that held profound sentimental value beyond their monetary worth. Laura gasped at the sight of a particular emerald necklace that had belonged to Queen Victoria. She had seen it in countless photographs, and had always wondered what it would feel like to wear something with such historical significance. Camilla encouraged her daughter to try it on, dismissing the protests of nearby staff members who watched in horror as centuries of protocol were casually discarded. Meanwhile, Tom showed particular interest in the Queen's collection of rare manuscripts and historical documents. Some of these papers contained private correspondence between monarchs, original drafts of important speeches, and personal diaries that revealed intimate thoughts about major historical events. The monetary value was enormous, but their historical significance was priceless. The heritage consultants worked efficiently, photographing items and making detailed notes about their condition and provenance. What appeared to be documentation for preservation purposes was actually preparation for potential sale or private ownership. Camilla had convinced herself that these items were being wasted in storage, that they deserved to be appreciated and enjoyed by living family members. As the afternoon progressed, several staff members grew increasingly distressed. Mrs. Henderson, the Queen's former personal dresser who had served for over 30 years, watched in tears as Camilla instructed her team to carefully remove several of the Queen's most cherished evening gowns. These weren't just clothes, but repositories of memory, each one connected to significant moments in royal history. The breaking point came when Camilla entered the Queen's most private sanctuary, her bedroom. This space had been left exactly as it was on the day she died, with her favorite books still stacked on the bedside table and her last knitting project folded neatly in its basket. Even Charles rarely entered this room, considering it too sacred to disturb. Camilla showed no such reverence. She directed her attention to a small jewelry box on the dresser that contained the Queen's most personal items. Her mother's wedding ring, a locket with photos of her children as babies, and a simple gold bracelet that Prince Philip had given her during their courtship. These pieces had never been part of the official crown jewels, but were far more precious to the family because of their intimate significance. As Camilla lifted the locket to examine it more closely, something inside Mrs. Henderson snapped. The loyal servant stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion and barely controlled rage. She reminded the Queen consort that these items were not hers to handle, that the king had specifically requested everything remain untouched until he could properly sort through his mother's belongings himself. Camilla's response revealed the depth of her sense of entitlement. She coldly informed Mrs. Henderson that as Queen Consort, she had every right to ensure the proper preservation and distribution of royal assets. She suggested that the servant was overstepping her boundaries and should remember her place in the new order. The cruelty of this response, delivered in the very room where the beloved Queen had breathed her last breath, shocked everyone present into silence. But Mrs. Henderson was not easily intimidated. She had served through decades of royal crises and understood her duty extended beyond any individual monarch to the institution itself. Unknown to Camilla, she had been discreetly photographing the day's activities with her mobile phone, creating evidence of what she considered to be theft of royal property. The situation escalated when Tom, emboldened by his mother's authority, began removing books from the Queen's personal library. These weren't just any books, but volumes that had been annotated in the Queen's own handwriting, containing her private thoughts about historical events she had witnessed. Some contained pressed flowers from significant royal occasions, others held personal photographs used as bookmarks. Laura, meanwhile, had moved beyond simply trying on jewelry to actually packing several pieces into a designer handbag she had brought for the purpose. She justified her actions by claiming these items would be safer in her personal care than sitting unused in royal vaults. The casual nature of this theft, conducted in broad daylight with her mother's encouragement, demonstrated how far the family had strayed from any sense of proper behavior. The final straw came when Camilla discovered a locked drawer in the Queen's writing desk. Rather than respecting this obvious boundary, she insisted that her consultants find a way to open it. The drawer contained the Queen's most private papers, personal letters from Prince Philip during their separation due to royal duties, handwritten notes about her concerns for her children during their various marital difficulties, and her private thoughts about the future of the monarchy. As the sun began to set on Saturday evening, Camilla and her family had assembled quite a collection of items they intended to take. Jewelry, manuscripts, photographs, clothing, and personal papers were carefully packed and prepared for transport. The Queen Consort had convinced herself that she was preserving history, but her actions amounted to the systematic looting of a beloved monarch's most precious possessions. What Camilla didn't know was that Mrs. Henderson had not been the only staff member documenting the day's events. The Queen's former private secretary had been quietly compiling a detailed report of everything he witnessed, including exact descriptions of items being removed and photographs of the participants. His loyalty to the late Queen's memory outweighed any fear of professional consequences. As Sunday morning dawned, Camilla prepared to complete her scheme before Charles's return from Scotland. She planned to have the most valuable items transported to secure storage locations controlled by her family, where they could be gradually integrated into their personal collections without immediate notice. She believed that by the time Charles discovered what had happened, it would be too late to reverse the process without causing a major scandal. But the loyal household staff had other plans. As Camilla slept soundly in the royal bed, confident in her success, Mrs. Henderson was placing urgent phone calls to Princess Anne and Prince William. The time had come to protect the Queen's legacy from those who would exploit it for personal gain, even if it meant confronting the King himself with evidence of his wife's betrayal. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the halls of power and force Charles to choose between his love for his wife and his duty to his mother's memory. Charles returned to Windsor Castle on Sunday evening, exhausted from his duties in Scotland, but looking forward to the quiet comfort of home. The plane journey had given him time to reflect on his new role and the weight of responsibility he carried. He thought fondly of his mother and the wisdom she had shared during their private conversations about the challenges of kingship. Her voice still echoed in his mind, guiding him through difficult decisions. As the royal car pulled through the castle gates, Charles noticed unusual activity around the main entrance. Extra security personnel stood at attention, and several cars he didn't recognize occupied the normally pristine courtyard. His private secretary, who had traveled with him, shifted uncomfortably in his seat and cleared his throat nervously. Before Charles could ask about the unusual circumstances, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Princess Anne. The text was brief, but alarming. "We need to speak immediately. It's about Mother's things. Come to the blue drawing room as soon as you arrive." The formal tone and specific location told Charles this was no casual family chat, but something requiring serious privacy. Inside the castle, the atmosphere felt electric with tension. Staff members moved with unusual urgency, their faces grave and worried. Charles had seen this look before, during family crises that threatened the monarchy's reputation. His stomach tightened with anticipation as he made his way through familiar corridors that now seemed somehow different, as if the very walls held secrets. The blue drawing room held Princess Anne, Prince William, and several senior members of the household staff, including Mrs. Henderson, whose red-rimmed eyes suggested she had been crying. The formal arrangement of chairs and the serious expressions told Charles immediately that something significant had occurred during his absence. Anne wasted no time with pleasantries. She had inherited their mother's directness and had never been one to soften difficult truths. With characteristic bluntness, she informed Charles that they had discovered evidence of systematic theft from the Queen's private collections. The word theft hung in the air like a physical blow, causing Charles to sink into the nearest chair as the implications hit him. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward with trembling hands, producing her mobile phone and a thick folder of documentation. Her voice shook with emotion as she described the events of the weekend, the casual way precious items had been handled, and the shocking disregard for the Queen's memory. Each detail felt like a dagger to Charles's heart, but worse was yet to come. Prince William, his face a mask of controlled anger, presented a detailed inventory of missing items. The list was staggering: jewelry worth millions, historical documents of incalculable value, personal photographs spanning decades, and intimate belongings that held profound sentimental significance. What made it even more painful was the personal nature of the theft. These weren't random artifacts, but items specifically chosen for their emotional impact. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Photographs showed Camilla directing the removal of items, her family members casually handling priceless artifacts, and professional appraisers documenting pieces for future sale. Video footage captured conversations where Camilla explicitly claimed ownership rights over the Queen's possessions, justifying her actions as appropriate for her new status. Charles felt the world tilt around him as he processed the betrayal. This wasn't a misunderstanding or overzealousness. It was calculated theft conducted by the woman he had married, supported, and defended against years of public criticism. The pain cut deeper than any political crisis or public scandal because it struck at the heart of his most sacred relationships, his love for his mother and his trust in his wife. The room fell silent as Charles struggled to respond. His hands shook as he reviewed the evidence, seeing undeniable proof of Camilla's actions. Each photograph felt like a personal violation, watching his mother's most precious belongings treated as commodities to be distributed among Camilla's family. The casual way they handled items that represented decades of royal history showed a fundamental lack of respect for everything the monarchy represented. Anne broke the silence by presenting Charles with an ultimatum that she and William had already discussed. The evidence was too strong to ignore, and the theft too serious to handle quietly. Either Charles took immediate action to recover the stolen items and address Camilla's behavior, or they would be forced to involve external authorities to protect the crown's interests. The monarchy's credibility depended on his response. The confrontation with Camilla came that very evening. Charles found her in their private sitting room, calmly reading a magazine as if nothing had happened. Her composure in the face of such serious accusations revealed either remarkable self-control or a disturbing lack of understanding about the gravity of her actions. When Charles presented the evidence, her initial response was denial, followed quickly by justification. Camilla attempted to frame her actions as preservation efforts, claiming she was protecting valuable items from neglect and ensuring they received proper appreciation from family members who would treasure them. She insisted that as queen consort, she had not only the right, but the responsibility to make decisions about royal assets. Her arguments revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of her role and responsibilities within the royal family structure. As the confrontation escalated, Camilla's true motivations became clear. She spoke bitterly about years of feeling excluded from royal circles, of watching Charles's devotion to his mother, while feeling her own family was treated as secondary. The theft wasn't just about valuable objects, but about claiming status and recognition she felt had been denied to her and her children. Charles listened with growing horror as his wife revealed depths of resentment he had never suspected. Her casual dismissal of the sentimental value of his mother's belongings, her inability to understand why he was upset, and her continued insistence on her right to distribute royal property showed a fundamental disconnect from the values that defined his family and his role as king. The final break came when Camilla refused to return the stolen items voluntarily. She had already moved many pieces to secure locations and claimed she would only return them if Charles agreed to formally recognize her children's inheritance rights within the royal family. This attempt to use his mother's belongings as bargaining chips crossed a line that Charles could never forgive. The king's response was swift and decisive. Within hours, royal security had recovered most of the stolen items from various locations where Camilla had hidden them. Legal documents were prepared to ensure the remaining pieces would be returned, regardless of Camilla's cooperation. The violation of trust was too fundamental to overcome, and Charles realized his marriage could not survive this betrayal. The formal separation was announced quietly, with Camilla retaining her title, but losing her position within the royal household. She was banned from all royal residences and stripped of her access to royal resources. Tom and Laura found themselves persona non grata within royal circles, their brief taste of potential inheritance replaced by permanent exile from the family they had tried to exploit. Charles spent long hours in his mother's study, surrounded by the recovered items that told the story of her remarkable life. Each piece returned felt like a small victory against those who would reduce her legacy to mere monetary value. The betrayal had been painful, but protecting her memory and honoring her lifetime of service mattered more than any personal relationship. The household staff who had shown courage in protecting the Queen's belongings were quietly rewarded with honors and increased responsibilities. Mrs. Henderson became the official guardian of the Queen's personal collection, ensuring that future access would be granted only to those who truly understood the historical and sentimental value of these precious artifacts. In the months that followed, Charles established new protocols for protecting royal heritage, ensuring that never again would personal greed threaten the monarchy's most treasured possessions. His mother's belongings were properly catalogued and preserved, with specific instructions that they would remain intact for future generations to study and appreciate. The scandal never became public knowledge, but within royal circles, it served as a powerful reminder that the monarchy's true strength lay not in its wealth, but in its commitment to service, tradition, and the sacred trust placed in it by the British people. Charles had chosen duty over personal comfort, protecting his mother's legacy even at the cost of his own happiness. As he sat in the evening light of his mother's favorite room, surrounded by the recovered treasures of her lifetime, Charles felt her presence more strongly than ever. He had honored her memory by protecting what she held dear, and in doing so, he had proven himself worthy of the crown she had worn with such dignity for 7 decades.